a passionate educator, a fine guitarist, and a good singer too, and a grad alum of App State. Then he went off to Stony Brook for his doctorate. And then he's had actually a really, really big year this year. This year, he returned to a year ago, he returned to join the music theory faculty at App State. He came back with his wife and his kid and the one on the way who was born last fall. He completed his doctorate this spring. So it's been a huge, and he's capping it off with talking to us. What a year. So I'm going to welcome RJ to come speak with us. And well, he'll tell you what he's going to talk about.
For some reason, I need to be more present on the mic. Don't hesitate to let me know.
Yes. Yeah, you're not shy.
Hello, everybody. So good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm overjoyed to be here and see a number of familiar faces. Hi, Anna. As Linda was introducing me, I'm RJ Wuagneux, and my wife, two boys, Avery and Camden, and my wife, Allison, moved here about a year ago. I'll say that we are Boonerangs, as Linda was indicating there. And also, as Linda said, I went to graduate school for classical guitar at Appalachian State, which is how I got to know a number of the faculty there, developed close relationships and friendships that are still keeping me going and fulfilled and nourished today. Today, I'm here to talk to you about a musical phenomenon that I have both experienced and observed. And this phenomenon is rooted in our collective experience with live groove-based music. I like to consider it or think about this kind of experience as one that has properties of transcendence. So in my larger research, what I look at and what I'm concerned with is how do we have those experiences with music that feel like we are changed afterwards, or that might bring us closer to some sort of shared unified consciousness. How does that work? And as you know, a music analyst, we like to dissect things and put on our analysis hats and point to musical structures and say, oh, it's this chord right here. In fact, I don't think it's that simple. I don't think that we can point to a musical structure and say, hey, this chord progression or these things in the music are doing that. I think it's much, much, much more than that. And those things that are comprised of the much more are what I want to speak with you today about. And that is all about music's affordances. So in my academic research, I ask what can be done with music, what its affordances are as a methodological tool to reframe the analytical object of music and expand the scope of inquiry into music and affect. In other words, I like to give agency to both the music and its listeners. It's my hope that this presentation might offer you some terminology to explore and describe your own transcendent musical experience. That said, I did my very best to make this presentation accessible to everybody, but please, do raise your hand, ask questions if you need clarification on anything. And of course, our discussion time is a great time to do that. But also, if during the presentation you have a question, please ask. I want this to be as interactive as possible. So we are going to start this presentation with a little bit of participatory listening to the opening groove and a bit of the song that I'm going to be discussing in this presentation. No pressure, but I invite you all to get up and move or sit down and move, however you would like to experience this. But this moment, these types of moments that we're going to witness here are exactly what I'm interested in, and something that I think we all have experienced on some level, whether we've been to a Phish concert or not. Phish is just my object or case study. I think these same experiences occur across the board. So again, Phish is my entryway here, but I think we all can relate to these experiences. And I may need to do a quick preferences check here, just to make sure that we're going through the loudspeakers. Pardon me, just one moment. There we go. All right, let's try that again. There we go. All right. And now I will, it may be a little loud. Is this okay. Don't want to blow anyone away. Small city. Sleep in the daytime. If they want to, if they want to, I'm checking them out. I'm checking them out. I've got it figured out. I've got it figured out. There's some good points, some bad points, but it all works out. I'm just a little freaked out. Find your city, find yourself a city to live in. I will find a city, find myself a city to live in. That was a cover of Cities by the Talking Heads for those that know the band. It's much slowed down and funkified in Phish's way, but if you caught that, that was the Talking Heads. So this presentation uses a live Phish performance of Cities, as I was saying, by the Talking Heads, to explore a shared, collectively embodied, and sustained affective experience as an affordance of groove during a musical event. I will consider how this groove cultivates and sustains a highly effective musical environment, which you could see by the dancing bodies and the crowd cheering at certain moments. That's what I consider affect. And we'll get into that in a little bit more in just a moment here. But I consider how this groove cultivates and sustains a highly effective musical environment that facilitates complex forms of synchronized engagement via processes such as entrainment, cognitive extension, and joint action, which I will get into a bit in this presentation. I will discuss two instances of what I call collectively embodied sense making as dynamic, affective, motivational interactions between the band and audience that propel the music forward. In other words, I'm interested in the band audience interplay, the types of feedback that the band gets and gives back to the audience, and how that might work to cultivate a highly effective environment, just like a musical dialogue between the musicians. But in this case, it's between the musicians, between the audience members, between the audience members and the crowd. And that's exactly what I'm interested in. And through those interactions, waves of affect are generated that pass through the crowd, whether that's through dance or cheer or just pure exuberant jumping in the air. But I look at the embodied effects of these experiences. So at key moments throughout the presentation, I'll also link some aspects of the 7 principles to the musical experience. We have a couple of ideas or concepts that I'd like to get into. And I'm not going to go too deeply into any of these, but I think they're important to give you an idea of how I'm thinking this in the sorts of disciplinary terrain that I'm engaging. So I use what's called a 4E framework, which is embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. Those are the 4 E's. Okay. So I think of, use a 4E framework to think of new ways about how music in a musical environment can work to generate and sustain affect. And this is an alternative or an augmentation to what's typically been looked at with musical expectation and form and expressivity. I am doing my best in my research to detach musical structures from the experience and just look at the way that we interact to the music. So conceiving of this groove as an environmental resource that invites our engagement for sense making permits consideration of, like I was saying, the 4 E's, the embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended qualities of live music and the musical organism. In this way, understanding music as an environmental resource opens up new areas for understanding and articulating how transcendence might emerge in a musical experience. So what is sense making? Sense making was developed through ongoing dialogue between phenomenology and the cognitive sciences. The enactive approach theorizes that both affect and cognition originate in embodied sense-making activity that simultaneously merges from and motivates the dynamic interactions between an organism and an environment. Now, you might be thinking, what is the difference between sense-making and making sense, right? So sense-making is an embodied process. Sense-making understands our bodies as intelligent. It understands that our bodies are the source of our realities. So, for example, we don't understand what a coffee mug is unless we can touch it, unless we can see it. We don't know what the color blue is unless we can experience it, right? So sense making is very much rooted in the way in which we engage our environment and the way that we develop embodied knowledge about a certain thing, object, or experience, which is different than making sense, which would be an intellectualized or more of a cognitive process that has to do with, once again, intellect. So making sense of a math equation is different than sense making with a math equation. If you're going to sense make with a math equation, you might want to actually experience what gravity feels like. If you're going to make sense of a math equation, you're going to look at how that math equation exists in a numerical form. So with that being said, sense making, or with that being said, affect is generated through our interaction with the living world and things in it. As an activity, sense making is intentional and expressive. It is essentially embodied in action. Exchanges with the world are understood to be inherently significant and therefore effective because they are the locus for the creation and appreciation of meaning, also known as sense making. As part of the enactive approach, experiences intertwined with being alive and enacting a meaningful world. A live Phish event, like many live music events, is a socially interactive experience in which interpersonal coordination, which is simply to say the way that we interact, affects our individual sense making. For example, dancing with somebody, you're going to dance maybe a little bit different than you might dance by yourself. Or when you're in conversation with somebody, that's going to affect the way that you are in dialogue, right? Depending on who that individual is. So as such, a highly effective musical environment is achieved through our participatory sense making. In other words, we must participate in order to cultivate these highly effective musical moments. So let's talk about participatory sense making just for a second here. Participatory sense making is defined as the coordination of intentional activity and interaction, whereby our individual sense making processes are affected and new domains of social sense making can be generated that were not available to each individual on her own. In other words, certain highly effective experiences are only achievable through the collective creation and appreciation of meaning. From this perspective, the mutual engagement of the band and attending fans cultivates a dynamic musical environment in which high levels of affect are achieved together through concerted participation. Let's talk about affordances. What do I mean by these? By affordances, I simply mean one's perceived possibilities for action in a given environment. And I'll unpack this a bit, both by the particular structural features of the environment and things in it. For example, the physical qualities of this place right now. It affords this stand or lectern here where I can sit and talk. We have these objects that allow me to be transmitted through the internet. We have this space that is resonant that allows my voice to carry so we can all hear. So the actual physical properties of this space, which typically kind of get pushed into the background of our thought, but are very important. The physical qualities of a space very much determine the way that we make sense in that space, right? As well as cultural knowledge. We all know that I'm speaking, and if you have a question, ask, right? There are these certain also is cultural knowledge that we take into the experience. In addition to the particular structural features of the environment and things in it, minute, we have a repertoire of sensory motor capacities that we use to detect and respond. So all of our senses, and we can do that. We can experience this through dance. We can experience this through tapping our foot to music. We can experience this through head bobbing. But any of the sensory motor capacities, which is to say the physical capacities that we have, are also included in affordances. So we have the thing and the object and the way that we engage that thing and the object. So what are some affordances of music then? So we use music to do things. Right? This is what I'm mostly concerned with in this presentation. What things might we do with music? Well, we can exercise or dance. We all know that if we've ever gone to a jog to music, you want something with a high BPM that's going to keep your feet moving. If you're exercising to music, same thing. You're not going to put on well, maybe you would, but I wouldn't put on a slow ballad if I was running. Right? I would want something to keep my brain and body moving to the beat. We use music to regulate our mood or emotions. When we're sad, we might listen to a piece of music that would uplift us. When we might use music for protest or social action. We might use music to express nationhood with national anthems. We might use music to sell things, like with Muzak, right, in the malls. Or we might make music to sell. Right. In that case, music's use is providing me an income. Right. We might use music to structure a Sunday service or facilitate a transcendent experience. All of these things and many more are possibilities for action that are associated with music. These are the affordances of music. And I invite you all to also contemplate how do you use music in your daily life or in events? So from this perspective, complex forms of synchronized engagement, such as collective entrainment and joint action, which I'll unpack those in just a moment, these are all affordances of groove. These affordances of groove are enacted through participatory sense-making in the live musical environment. A quick overview of relevant groove scholarship, and I mean quick, will provide us with a basic definition and understanding to carry into the rest of this presentation. Scholars of groove often delineate two characteristic meanings for the term groove. The first is relating to the immanent musical elements of a music performance. Over in music theory land, music theorist Lawrence Zybkowski defines musical grooves as a large-scale, multi-layered pattern that involves both pitch and rhythmic materials and whose repetitions form the basis for either a portion or all of a particular tune. Similarly, music theorist Mark Spicer defines grooves as the tapestry of riffs, usually played by the drums, bass, rhythm guitar, and/or keyboard in some combination that work together to create the distinctive rhythmic or harmonic backdrop which identifies a song. So we have groove as musical elements or musical structures, but we also have groove as a participatory phenomenon. Charles Keel, for example, one of the earliest scholars of the subject, emphasizes its social element. Groove exists within a network of participants. Getting into the groove, he writes, described how a socialized listener anticipates pattern in a style and feelingfully participates by momentarily tracking and appreciating subtleties vis-a-vis overt regularities. And finally, we have the understanding of groove as a dynamic system, and this is from the cognitive sciences. So taking this participatory notion of and feel of groove a bit further to include considerations of the mind-body system and musical environment, Maria Vitek, a music researcher in cognition sciences, observes that there are no boundaries between mind-body of sound, and groove is not just the mutual relationship between the brain and the world, but is a system that emerges in the cooperation of musical structure, body movement, and attention. This is what I'm interested in and want to speak with you about today. This dynamic, effective motivational system that Maria is referring to is an affordance of groove. It is sense-making that requires active bodily engagement with the musical structure by the band and audience. In other words, we understand a groove by moving to it. We dance to the groove. We don't sit there and think, ooh, that was a nice entrance. Oh, there, right? We have to move to the groove to understand it. Okay, so let's move into the music. This timeline notes the onset and duration of each major event. The two things I want to just point your attention to are in the yellow boxes at 3 minutes and 42 seconds and 7 minutes and 42 seconds. Entrainment is a concept that has developed outside the discipline of music research, and it refers specifically to a synchronization of some aspect of our biological activity with regularly occurring events in the environment. For example, you might want to start bobbing your head or tapping your toe to this, right? In order to line up with the duration or onset of that beat. So an affordance of grooves' repetitive qualities is entrainment, in which the listener engages the music through expressive sense-making acts such as dancing. So entrainment has been studied at length. I'll give you just an idea of what some of the social phenomena surrounding entrainment are. First of all, it can facilitate successful social interactions and effortless communication, forming a sort of gateway to a sense of social ease. I experienced this when I was up here singing Get Together. I felt like I was getting to know everybody simply by sharing in a space and singing and moving my body with you. And that was entrainment. Entrainment and cognitive extension is an idea developed by phenomenologist Joel Kruger. And he says that we engage with music because it affords synchronously organizing our reactive behavior and felt responses. We take pleasure in letting music assume some of the organizational and regulative functions that normally fall within our own endogenous capacities. In other words, when we're together, our feelings are not just a simple 1+1. The way we experience is a collective unification that I think is greater than the sum of its parts. So I understand entrainment and cognitive extension as affordance of groove that are enacted through joint action. And this goes on beyond reflections of synchronized movement to include considerations of shared intentions, shared attention, and shared representations. Researchers Sebastian Kirchner and Michael Tomasello at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology have shown that joint action during music performance promotes social behavior, and joint action establishes a heightened sense of agency and a sense of we-ness, suggesting that groove as joint action in this musical environment extends the notion of scene participant beyond the threshold of the stage to include the band. In this way, each band member's repetitive body movements, and in the video there, you might have seen the guitarist moving his body in a certain way, the bass player tapping his foot in a certain way. Each member of the band is moving their bodies in a way that complements their musical part in the dialogue. Right. And so in this way, it's a means to heightened musical creation, meaning shared and collective embodiment is a means to heighten musical creation, connection, and expression. The musicians are achieving effective synchrony by sharing in the groove. Joint action in the context of this musical experience is the collective embodiment of the communal sense of we and an affordance of this groove. Rather than being one definite sort of thing, Edward Casey, a phenomenologist, proposes that a place takes on the specific qualities of its occupants, reflecting these qualities in its own constitution and description and expressing them in its occurrence as an event. Places not only are, they happen. So keeping this point in mind and keeping the affordance of groove in mind, which is that they promote social behavior, heightened sense of agency, and a sense of we-ness, let's return to the video to observe a wave of affect generated by Phish and their audience being co-situated in the performance moment. Let me get the... Is that what's going on? Okay, thank you. It's only the river. I'm sorry. Engaged fans' embodied reaction in the form of exuberant cheer and dance to the word Greeks is an active acknowledgement of the event as an articulation of place, as this show was held at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, California, and underscores dancing as a vehicle for joint action. It is a means of enacting a shared attentional framework that shapes the character and content of this performance. When others' dancing reactions shifted the word Greeks, for instance, I might feel my body compelled to alter my own movements accordingly. Once again, this idea of participatory sense-making. I might throw my hands up in the air to join in the gesture with my fellow fans, might bob my head, sway my body, carried along by the groove and the movement that is passing through the audience. Thus, I co-inhabit the lived time of the musical piece with others. The interlocking rhythmic patterns and tapestry of riffs and the dancing these patterns afford forge an interactive phenomenon that appears to synchronize the listeners to one body and to one moving mass. This ongoing dynamic of coordination and convergence is a tacit affirmation that I and thou have in this context enacted an experiential we. And I believe this clearly displays the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part. Moreover, this moment of collective embodiment is a mutual acknowledgement and unique expression of participatory sense-making and of place. In other words, this wave of affect is an affordance of the unique features of this environment, including its sound world. Moving on to my final, if we have time. Do we have about 5 minutes? Yes? Okay. Awesome. So moving on to my second example, I look at it when this music goes what's called type 2. I won't get into any of that, but I will say that a type 2 improvisation simply occurs when the band diverges from the established musical structure or chord progression. So they're going off the grid, so to speak. They're going into the deep end, unexplored territory, right? A type 2 improvisation is the highest expression of Phish's music. Musicologists such as Jacob Cohen have noted that Phish fans are quick to notice when a song's chord progressions, rhythms, and structure fall apart and becomes malleable through improvisation. These moments are often cheered at concerts. So going back to the timeline, which this is at 7 minutes and 40 seconds, we can see that the onset of type 2 comes shortly after the audience provides feedback on their experience of 648. My point here is that the audience feels this shift happen and they provide feedback to the band that then encourages them to carry on and push forward into unexplored musical territory for an additional 4 minutes. So this for me is a wonderful example of band audience interplay that pushes the music into new spaces and encourages the band not only to explore, but for the audience to explore that same space with them through dance. I was there. Yes, that's one. That's one. I took notes during that performance, actually, and that's when I decided this was the show for me that made me decide this is what I wanted to pursue for my doctoral studies. So this, for me, is a very meaningful performance and experience, and that it actually, one affordance of this music is that it made me go get a PhD to explain, try to understand how this works and how this happens, how these sorts of moments emerge, where we can leave feeling like we have a new best friend that we just met because we went through this experience, not just together, but kind of hand in hand and sharing embodied spaces. If you want to know more technical jargon about how that works, please ask, but I'll skip over that part. But one important thing here is that an affordance of the kinds of structural transformations that happened in order to go type 2 was that it welcomes new paths of musical exploration and embodied and participatory sense making. So this shift to type 2 is pleasant because it alters the way the groove's musical spaces feel while retaining the quarter note beat. Furthermore, as the feeling of the 4-measure phrase begins to dissolve and with it the body's structured response to cyclical phrasing, a new relationship can be forged. Okay. The new opportunity for embodied sense making that comes with the onset and execution of this type of improvisation establishes new effective spaces that are shared and explored by dancing bodies. This new musical space is also explored with the band as they improvise, generating and sustaining new waves of affect along the way and reinforcing a sense of we-ness. These fans are feelingfully participating in this groove by momentarily tracking and appreciating subtleties vis-a-vis overt regularities, communicating with the band via their continued bodily engagement and cheer at specific moments. Feedback in the form of exuberant cheers, an example of band-audience interplay during a groove that encourages the band to explore new musical spaces. Taking this notion of feedback and band-audience interplay one step further, we can understand the crowd response that occurs in this moment as a wave of affect that sustains the groove by encouraging the band to forge on into unexplored musical territory for an additional 3.5 minutes, making this one of the most extended versions of cities in over 110 performances. So let's put this all together. We have seen that entrainment, cognitive extension, and joint action are affordances of groove that are enacted by participatory sense-making in a live music environment. We've also seen how these participatory sense-making processes, such as dancing, cheer, etc., generate and sustain affect in a live improvisatory music environment. This interactive improvisational musical environment relies on effective relations among bodies, between the bodies of musicians, between musicians and engaged listeners, and between the sonic bodies that comprise the multiple overlapping events that constitute this musical performance's unfolding. In this way, sharing in the groove is an embodied musical dialogue between the band and audience in which each member is attending to the emergent properties of the groove via a shared attentional framework. And finally, beyond the event, and this is what I'm mostly interested in my research. How does this impact our ways of being in the world beyond the spatiotemporal boundary of the experience? In other words, how can music or an experience like this change the world, right? So I believe that understanding and experiencing collective musicking in the ways I have discussed in this presentation can offer us a musical model for positive world building, as many aspects of the experience demonstrate acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth, the use of democratic process, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, as well as a respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Furthermore, live participatory musical experiences can impact our ways of being in the world beyond the spatio-temporal boundary of the event. In other words, after it's over. We can use musical affordances to make the world a more just, equitable, and compassionate place. In our discussion, I welcome ways to explore how your experience with music and some of music's affordances have and might been used in your own experience, and how to employ some of these 7 principles or aspects for positive world building. Thank you all so much.
All right. Well, big thanks to RJ. We've gone quite a bit over time. So I think that we will, we're fascinated. And besides, I mean, you get a chance to listen and groove to some Phish. So we are going to, instead of having a question and answer period, a discussion period, as we often do, what I'm going to do is we're going to wind up the service. I'm betting that RJ's not going to immediately leave. So think about the question that you might have. What, is there food over still? So the coffee and snacks that happened before the service, apparently there's enough left that we should go over and see if we can be like a herd of locusts there and take care of that. And so I welcome you to go over, have a snack after the service, and maybe chat with RJ a little bit. And next week is our welcome breakfast, and it will be the first appearance of the newly formed group that we are calling the Boone Ooks, spelled capital U, K-E-S, the ukulele group that is going to be joining us for the service at the welcome breakfast next week. So be sure to come back for